Hey, it's Nicholas Thompson. I'm the CEO of The Atlantic, and this is The Most Interesting Thing in AI, a podcast produced by Rethink, The Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in collaboration with PwC, a leader in helping organizations use AI. In each episode, we're exploring how artificial intelligence is reshaping our lives. When I'm not running The Atlantic or running outside, I also like to make music. I've been writing songs since I was about 15 years old, and I spent a decent amount of my 20s as a busker playing my acoustic guitar in the New York City subway system. In recent years, I mostly just play my children to sleep, but I've also been experimenting a little bit with the ways that AI can help me be more creative with music. So today's guest is someone special. Her name is Holly Herndon. She's an artist and a musician who has long called the laptop her primary instrument. She used AI to craft a number of experimental electronic music albums, and she's really smart about this stuff. I wanted to ask her more about her process, her inspiration, and what AI means for the future of art and artists. Here's my conversation with Holly Herndon. Holly Herndon, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with a song I wrote. And I wrote it a couple decades ago. It's called Spit Bugs with Horns. I'm going to play a little bit right now. So then a couple years ago, I uploaded to a website called Holly Plus. That gave me an AI version of your voice, which I added onto it. And it sounded okay. Then I sent it to you. You made it sound much better, and you sent it back to me. So now let's play a little clip from it. So what we did is we took out the trumpet in the song. The trumpet was played by my best friend from childhood, Taylor Holbein. He's a wonderful musician. And his trumpet track became your AI voice. So tell me a little bit more about the mechanics of what was going on and what you did.
So Holly Plus is a project that I released in 2021. This was COVID time when we were all spending a lot of time at home. All of our tours were canceled. So I was like, okay, this is the perfect time to work on my AI voice clone. And it's kind of an umbrella term for several different instruments. So you can drag any kind of sample onto this web interface, and then you'll get back a kind of choir of Holly-like sounds using a process called timbre transfer. So it's literally mapping the performance of one sound onto the sound world or sound quality of another. But there's also two other instruments that I have in my toolbox. One of them is a score reading instrument, so I can feed Holly Plus scores with lyrics, and I use that to make a video covering Jolene, Dolly Parton's amazing.
I like that a lot. That's such a good song.
And then I also have a real-time version where you can sing through a microphone, and with just a very slight latency, you can get a real-time timbre transfer of my voice. And these were all created with really good engineering friends of mine. One, Never Before Heard Sounds in New York, and then the real-time systems with Voctro Labs in Barcelona. So we then took the real-time system and used that to make the better, cleaner output for your track.
So let's play a little bit of Jolene right here. So let's go back now. What does it mean you took an AI clone of your voice? How did you do that? And can anyone do that? Could I take my voice and then create a cover of Jolene?
You could. There are open source models out there. It's all about the kind of training data that you input. I used what's called a Temet script, which is a script that's used for machine learning training that covers all of the phonemes of whatever language you're using. So for English, I covered all of the vowel sounds and all of the fricatives and everything. And then I sang from the lowest part of my range to the highest part of my range to cover all of the kind of sounds that my voice could make.
Wait, that's amazing. So you have this like long list of all the vowel sounds in English and you're just sitting there with a high fidelity microphone singing them?
Yes.
So you sing that, and somehow through the script, you've sung all the possible vowel sounds and combinations.
Mm-hmm.
So then you feed this into an AI, and then that can be mapped onto whatever you want to map it on, whether it's a trumpet piece in my track or whether it's the lyrics of Jolene.
Exactly. So it's creating a model of all of the sound possibilities of my voice. And then with timbre transfer, it's trying to match the input with the closest thing in that model. And then you have an output version of that. So each model has a different architecture. So I can't really speak about them all in the same way. But more or less, it's all using this idea of timbre transfer.
And when you listen to Jolene, do you think that's better than the real Holly Herndon could sing Jolene, or is it worse than the real Holly Herndon could sing Jolene?
I don't think I would give it a value judgment because I just think it's different. I think that the real Holly Herndon has never gone into a studio to record Jolene because that doesn't feel like something that's in my wheelhouse. So for those who aren't familiar with my work, I do a lot of heavily processed, digitally manipulated vocal sounds in my music. It often doesn't sound like a voice when it comes out the other end. I don't do a lot of just like straight up acoustic singing. So I would probably be a little bit too bashful to go in a studio and just like hash out Jolene. Something about that kind of layer of separation allowed me to be confident to send my digital twin into the studio to perform Jolene.
So one of the things that's interesting about this is you used Holly Plus to make an interpretation of a Dolly Parton song, but Dolly could have made a Dolly Plus to make an interpretation of a Holly Herndon song.
Exactly. And I would actually love it if Dolly did that. I think, her voice is almost a national treasure at this point. So it would be really wonderful if it could continue on to sing decades in the future.
How do you think about the relationship between Holly and Holly Plus?
I think Holly Plus is really a tool that I collaborate with that's able to do things with my voice that my physical voice can't do. For people who are public figures, there's already this kind of idea of your public self and your private self. And I think through social media, we sometimes almost fool ourselves into thinking that those are all one and the same, but they're not. There's the mediated self and then there's the real self. And so Holly Plus to me fits in that paradigm. This is something that we've also explored in the visual realm. So we did a project X Harry Mutant X for the Whitney Biennial last year where we were trying to understand what my embedding is. So there are enough images tagged with my name that I have an embedding in large generative models. An embedding is basically a concept. And so if you have an embedding or a concept of something like a bottle, it's aggregating everything that's tagged bottle on the internet. And so I was really curious to understand what Holly Herndon is in this latent space. And it turns out that I'm kind of a pastiche of myself, like an orange blob of hair. It's not the fullness of myself as a human being, but it's a kind of version of me that operates seamlessly in this digital space.
So if I remember correctly, one of the prompts you put in was make a building that looks like Holly Herndon, right? Or make a building with the expression of Holly Herndon. And so the sort of the logical embedding in the AI system created a building with like an orange bob.
Yes, exactly. It's like a white building with blue eye windows and orange bob hair.
It's an incredible thought experiment to think about, like, of all the things that make us up and all the many things that we've done, which are the ones that the AI, which has read everything ever written about us and by us, absorbs into its system and determines creates us or means us.
Exactly. And how much agency do we have in these systems? If this is, as many people are calling it, a new version of the internet, do we still have the kind of right of self-determination? That was the dream of the internet, right? Is like you can be whoever you want to be online. But it turns out in these systems, I just get to be this orange blob of hair.
And so one of the things that I love about your work is that you fully leaned into AI and you're experimenting and you're pushing it forward, but you're not like an AI utopian. You're not one of the people who believes it's going to like make us all infinitely rich and make art infinitely better. You're in fact deeply challenging it, right?
Yeah, I often say I find myself in that sexy middle ground where, this AI conversation has, for better or worse, entered into culture wars. And so that's become a kind of team sport where you're pro or against. And yeah, I find myself in the middle. I see huge challenges. My partner, Matt Dryhurst, and I have tried to build some solutions to some of the challenges that we see with our organization spawning. But I'm also really excited about the new capabilities that it unlocks in my practice. New ways of collaborating with people, things that it reveals about myself to myself. So it's not a black or white issue for me.
I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago that was so interesting. You were talking about why you made Holly Plus and why you experiment with AI. And part of it was to extend your capabilities, right? To sing an arpeggio you couldn't sing, but also part of it was to create a meta critique of the world we live in. Will you explain that more?
With the voice modeling, a lot of the narrative around that was around deepfakes. And people were really scared about their voices and their identities being stolen. And that's a very real concern that should be taken seriously. But I was kind of asking myself, is there a way to do this creatively that's not simply extractive, that could kind of have like a virtuous cyclical system where we could be collaborating with people and there could be some sort of agency in that collaboration, and we could feel like we have some kind of mutual respect with the people who are using the tool. And so in order to do that, we felt like we had to build this collective of people who would argue and talk about these ideas and come up with ways to build an economic model around it. So we used Ethereum building blocks to build royalty splits on chain. And, this was in 2021. So a lot of this stuff was like janky and kind of like duct taped together. But I know through conversations that I've had with people at really big AI companies, it had an impact on product management and the technical team about how we should be dealing with each other's IP moving forward. Because back then, it blows my mind, but people weren't really thinking about this data issue. Because I started working with AI around 2016 and I have this background of music, it was natural for me to think about where the data would be coming from. It didn't feel okay to me to just take anyone's music and train a model. I felt like I needed to make my own training data. I'm grateful that I started with machine learning before commercialized large models, because I had to build things from the ground up. And I think because we have this background, we brought a lot of these questions to some of the larger AI companies, and I was blown away that they just weren't really thinking through this issue. They didn't think people would be upset about it. And of course, fast forward several years, and it's one of the biggest conversations today.
You built this model, you used your own voice, you trained on it, and in a way, it showed a bunch of musicians, showed a bunch of people who observed it, and it showed the people at the AI company that copyright matters, sources matter, and yet the folks who care about copyright are losing right now. The big AI companies are continuing to train on stuff they don't have rights to, only licensing extremely reluctantly. And the perception in the general public, as far as I can tell pretty much, is let's go headlong into this and get as much data and feed into as many models as we can. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't know what your feed looks like, but my feed looks like a lot of angry, creative people who don't want to be included in these data sets. One of the first things that we did at Spawning back in 2021, 2022, we made a website called haveibeentrained.com. So you could go to this website and you could see if your images were in any of the popular training sets. That led directly to us building an opt-out registry that you can add to your website. And so we've had over 2 billion images opted out through our protocol, and it is actually being acknowledged by Stability and some of the other companies. It's just, in order to get full consensus, we have to have legislators, and you have to force it. You have to force functioning. We've made a lot of headway in the EU because there is actually legal precedent there for an opt-out. But that's what we advocate for a universal opt-out. That way, you can still have access to large pools of data. You can still encourage open source training of models, but people who really want to protect their copyright should have that right.
After the break, I ask Holly some more questions about the future of AI and music. So when I go to Spotify right now, it's all real artists. There's some playlists that include AI slop. There's maybe some weird collaborations, but it's artists. When I go there in 5 years, is it going to be a whole bunch of AI-generated characters that have been created by companies that aren't really tethered to embodied humans? What's it going to be?
In some ways, that's largely up for the public to decide what they want. If they're going to be happy with endlessly generated music, then if that's what they demand, then that's what they'll get. I'm actually not so worried about that, and wouldn't be so sad to see Spotify turn into a slop farm, because I think it's already been pretty bad for music with its kind of economic model. And so if that kind of overwhelming amount of slop is catering to a certain audience, you're always going to have people who want something else, and they will find each other, and there will be other platforms and other ways for other economic models around that. And I think could actually be really good.
That's an interesting, it's like the worse the better argument. Spotify will thrive. Tons of people will go, lots of money will be made on Spotify. There'll be ads, but people who love music created by embodied humans will go somewhere else.
Yeah, and they'll go to concerts where human beings play music.
And then these humans who are playing the concerts, how will they be using AI in their creative process? Some of them will reject it entirely on principle. Some of them will do what you do, which is to use AI to give your voice superpowers. Tell me some of the other things that artists will be using with AI.
Yeah, I think there's a million possible futures, many of which I can't even imagine. But I think for me, one of the things I like to do is I like to iterate with AI. So I like to have it version myself, and then I can audition different paths. I remember talking to one of my professors at Mills College, Maggie Payne, and she was laughing at how easy we have it nowadays with Ableton Live, because we could do a save as and we could try something else. And she was like, back in my day, I had to cut the tape. And once you cut the tape, that decision was made. And so thinking about how that kind of changed the compositional process between the save as and the you have to make this cut and be deliberate about it. It's not like that ruined music. It just changed how people experimented with their kind of versions. I could see AI having a similar role.
You and I were together at this event in Italy talking about AI and humanism. And one of the points that one of the speakers made on stage is that in the future, art will be less about the individual and more about the process they use, that there's going to be this gradual shifting. When you were listening, did you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that, and I think that's already happened. I think it's easy to confuse the media for the art, but I think the art isn't the WAV file, it isn't the JPEG, it isn't the painting even. It's this complex web of interpretation between humans. It's like kind of consensus mechanism between humans. It's a very complex process of meaning making that's very situated in the context in which it's made. Networks of people creating work together has been something that's happened over the last few decades, and I think that will continue to evolve. The framework that we like to use, we like to call it protocol art. So we like to look at decisions that are made upstream of media and how they affect the output of media. So you might think about an engineer at Instagram choosing the kind of image format for the scroll or the kind of incentive mechanism around likes. Those kind of engineering decisions have had enormous impact on aesthetics and on the way that art is shared through these social media sites. So we as artists like to intervene at the protocol level and design systems that then create unique media as an output across modalities.
So what are the choices that you've made about how Holly Plus travels through the world that are important to understand?
Well, I think the first choice of just making it freely available to everyone is like a fundamental kind of design decision. So just from a perspective of which tools I made available to the public, but also we decided to share revenue of any sales to build more tools. So that kind of aligns us in terms of our incentives for promoting each other's work and for releasing work together.
And are there things that Holly Plus won't do? Like, will Holly Plus sing anti-Semitic lyrics?
The version that's public can't really sing lyrics. We had this issue with X Harry Mutant X at the Whitney because we didn't put any guardrails up. And then, of course, politics being as they are, the page just got really overwhelmed with really unpleasant imagery. So we started replacing some of the words with cute cats. People will always find a way around. Like, people would figure out which words were being replaced by cute cats, and then they would use something else. But yeah, in some ways you can have the Streisand effect. And if you try to control things too much, then it can just like embolden people to try to break it even more. I'm generally of a kind of less censorious mind.
You're very passionate about free speech. You're very passionate about open creativity. And you believe that people experimenting leads us to good outcomes in general. So you understand what's happening to music and what's happening to AI more than almost anyone. What are the key moments that are going to happen in the next few years that help determine whether it's possible for artists to make a living in AI, whether the music that most of us listen to is one that gives fair compensation, but that also maximizes creativity. What are you going to be watching and trying to understand that's going to be happening societally?
I think the kind of future of the open internet as we know it is at stake here. I think if we don't find a way to respect opt-outs and find the kind of pipeline for data manners, I think we're going to have a very balkanized web. And for me, someone who grew up in rural East Tennessee, I really loved having access to the internet to be able to see a wider worldview. And I really want that for young people growing up. We ran an experiment at Spawning in 2022 called the Kuduro Network, where we bought up a bunch of websites that we knew were being scraped. And we created a kind of like tar pit situation where it would just spin the crawlers and waste their time. And if we noticed that crawlers were coming to the sites, we could just turn on the Kuduro Network. We basically stopped all global AI training for like 30 minutes at a time when we turned it on. We have this crazy graph and we're in the Discords and the developers are like, what's happening? Did your model stall? And to us, that's like the worst case scenario, that we have this kind of like super defensive network where people have these giant walled gardens of information. I really like the idea of a public intelligence, public domain. So this year we released PDM-12, which is the largest public domain image training set that developers are using to make public domain base layer models. Spawning is also working on a fully public domain image model. We call it public diffusion. I love the idea of there being a fully public domain base image model so that if an artist comes along and wants to fine tune on their own images, they can sell access to that model. They can sell work from that model, knowing that they haven't infringed on anyone else's work and not worrying about any kind of copyright situation down the line. So I'm a strong believer in public domain, and that kind of keeps me hopeful for the future.
That reminds me of something that Audrey Tong has talked about on this podcast in a previous week, and something that she talked about while you and I were in Italy recently, which is that there's a vertical race in AI, which is the big companies competing with each other, building ever more powerful models that will make ever more money. And then there's a horizontal race where there's a lot of people working with open source tools, a lot of nonprofits, educational institutions, tinkerers, and they're building kind of their own rules, their own morals, their own values, their own systems that eventually will get embedded into the larger, powerful AI models. And it sounds like what you're saying is, for music, it's almost like the tinkerers, the experimenters, the open source people need to figure out how to make opt-outs work, right? How to figure out identity, how to figure out all kinds of questions that protect the rights of artists in this larger AI scrum.
100%. And that's why we've dedicated so much of our lives to this very question. We're full-time artists, but we're also full-time working on this question with our colleagues at Spawning. It's almost been a brutal reality check into human nature, because I think we often think about all of the problems coming from the big AI companies. But I've also noticed, even in the kind of solution creation space, there are also these kind of misaligned incentives. So there are competing narratives and people aren't always wanting to collaborate. There are a lot of people who are starting to build opt-outs from the ground up now. When we built our system 3 years ago, and we would love to collaborate with them, we can tell them what went wrong and what didn't, and we can save them a lot of time if we would work together. But there's all these incentives. An academic wants to get tenure, or a manager wants to get promotion, or a politician wants to get reelected. So even in the problem-solving space, you have all of these misaligned human incentives for solving the problem.
Let me ask you, in the problem-solving space, if you could list like the 3 or 4 biggest problems to solve for music, what are they?
1, I would say universal opt-outs. 2, I would say free and high-quality education that doesn't put people into student debt. I think one reason why a lot of people have a lot of anxiety around this is because they're coming out of universities with a huge amount of debt, and then they're seeing their field be completely upended all over again. If we could unburden people from this crazy student debt, I think that would help free up people to experiment a little bit more. And number 3, I wish that the conversation could be less polarized and more about compromise.
Does there need to be the creation of a new streaming platform where it's all verified humans? What else do you want to see?
I would like to see a more decentralized subcultural approach to music economics. I think one of the problems was this kind of one-size-fits-all solution that Spotify provided, which is really great for consumers. For smaller, more experimental music, the example I always bring up is Trinity for the Victims of Hiroshima. This is a really beautiful symphonic work that's very harrowing and difficult to listen to, and you're not going to listen to it on repeat at a dinner party, but you need to listen to it in order to understand the concept behind it and the beauty in it, but you probably only need to listen to it a couple times. And so if that's only valued at a cent because it's only been played a couple times, that makes no sense. Whereas you might have a pop song that's really great that you put on every morning to get, I don't know, excited to brush your teeth or whatever. These things have fundamentally different logics, and they need to have different economies built around them. I don't think it all needs to be placed in the same basket.
I remember once I had a party at my house where we agreed to listen to John Coltrane for, I think it was 18 hours straight. And so we started.
Were you sober?
I was at the start. And so you start with, I don't know, like my favorite things, and you start with the easy stuff. And by the end, you get to Ascension, which is this crazy mix of horns that people listen to very infrequently. But I remember listening to Ascension at the end when the sun is coming up in the East Village. I'm in my early 20s and feeling like I understood it, right? And so there's one moment in my life where I've been able to listen to Ascension. It was an extremely meaningful thing. But I've never put Ascension on while making breakfast. I've put on my favorite things 1,000 times. I put a Love Supreme on 300 times. And what is the value that one should assign to these works of art?
100%. And I think when it all goes into the super metricized Spotify environment and also the algorithmic recommendation systems, these things don't work for all music. I remember being younger and going into record stores and someone showing me a record that was just completely incomprehensible to me. And it took several listens to really get in there and understand why this person was recommending it to me. If that was just like a click away, or if it was an algorithmic system, I would only be served things that I was familiar with, that I was already happy to listen to. And I think it's important for us to grow our sense of aesthetics and our musical ears to be exposed to things that we don't initially understand.
This gets at one of the fundamental challenges of AI across disciplines, which is that in some ways it should make us much more capable of understanding really complex art and much more capable of creating really complex art, as you've done, right? You've extended your voice to have all these cool arpeggios that you couldn't have. But on the other hand, it makes it so easy to create really basic, simple, appealing art that we get flooded by all the slop. And so I feel like there's this like universal question, whether it's in writing or whether it's in music or whether it's in art, of whether AI leads us to complexity or whether it leads us to this kind of banal simplicity.
I think it does both, and it's how we use it. An AI system's only as smart as its prompter. You can do something really basic, but you could also do something really complicated. As a kind of research tool, it's been hugely helpful for me to go really deep on certain subject matters, or to, in building symbolic AI models around, for example, I'm working on the canon of Hildegard von Bingen at the moment, and understanding how her language was tied to the kind of melisma that she would include in her kind of chant, in her chanting. Through that analysis, I feel like I have a deeper understanding of her music. So it's like any kind of tool.
Yeah.
It can be used for the most banal or the worst parts of humanity, or it could also be used to elevate us.
So I have one son who plays the cello, one son's learning the clarinet, another son played the trombone. How should they think about AI if they decide to become musicians, which is highly unlikely, but it's not impossible? How should they think about incorporating AI into their studies of these instruments?
Oh, that's a really good question. It depends on if they're more interested in score analysis and more kind of a classical route, or if they're more interested in the kind of sensual nature of audio itself, which is what I'm more interested in. I would encourage them to perform their instruments through various timbre transfer systems, to have their horn sing, to try systems that can improvise along with them.
And so they should be learning to understand how they can use AI to create music, learning to understand AI so they can help, in a way, actually listen more closely as well.
And I think in this kind of what I like to call infinite media landscape that we're entering, I think it's important to find kind of your unique sound. It's going to become really easy to make pastiche, genre-specific music, but what really speaks to you and what really makes you stand out? Or is it kind of a unique voice to your specific kind of perspective or subjectivity? I think that becomes all the more important.
Can I ask you about another quote of yours that has intrigued me? I sometimes feel guilty for making art when I know that it will be treated as naive utopianism. What did you mean?
Oh my gosh.
That was in 2023.
Really? Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't really know what we were talking about or what the context of that specific quote is. But, you know, since we've had this experience in the kind of infrastructure space and kind of parallel to the art space, I've become more appreciative of what art can do and how it functions. It doesn't necessarily have to have a business model. It doesn't necessarily have to have a specific logic. The art space is really a space where you're kind of allowed to do things that you can't do in any other space. And that feels like a really unique privilege to be able to dedicate my life towards. And so because I have that privilege, I try to live up to that, I guess, every day.
It seems like you're not only living up to it, but you're trying to help make it more possible for more people, too.
Well, it's no fun to play alone. I much more enjoy a kind of thriving scene, a thriving community of fellow practitioners and artists who I can argue with and get in very kind of niche debates about this field. It's more interesting if there are more people playing along.
I just had a vision of two futures, one where we figured out the economic model, the distribution model, different forms of creation, and there are all kinds of independent artists who, as they have been for a long time, are making their own work. And then I had a vision of a patronage model, which goes back, and it's like the big AI companies employ 10 musicians who create all the music that we listen to, and that last one is grim.
That last one is grim, but that last one also assumes that people are banned from making music, and I just don't see a world where that happens. Like, music is an active thing, musicking. More people music than probably any other pastime on earth. I think choir is one of the most popular hobbies in the United States, and a lot of the people who are active in choirs are not professional singers, but it's a huge part of their life and a huge part of their identity. So, yeah, unless we live in a future where you're not allowed to music anymore, that would be a very dark reality. I don't see that happening.
No, and I've loved music both. My years as a musician introduced me to all kinds of people and cultures. And there were situations traveling around the world with my guitar where you can't speak the same language. You don't have an obvious form of connection, but you can play together. I remember once, one of the most incredible musical experiences of my life is I was hiking in the dunes of Mali, and I had my guitar. And I just start to play, and then suddenly all these people emerge from a cave and start singing. It was like this incredible transcendent moment where I didn't even know there were people there. It was dark, and then everybody comes out, and we have this wonderful, we're all singing together, and I'm playing guitar. There are kinds of human connection that can happen through music that really can't happen any other way.
That's really beautiful.
Holly, when I think about music, there's a certain amount of it that's transmissible through scores, but some of it is just embodied. Like, I have songs that I've written on my guitar, and I can't hum them or sing them. I don't know what the notes are. They've never been recorded. In a way, they don't exist. They only exist in this embodied knowledge where if I take up a guitar, I can actually play them. And I don't really know what I'm playing. And it made me wonder, like, to what degree is musical knowledge necessarily embodied, and to what degree can it be captured outside of the body?
That's a really great question. This has been a question for musicians through the ages. Scores are so imperfect. They're always interpreted, and recording audio is also imperfect. I think it's a huge part of our evolutionary process as human beings. We're the only land animals that sing, because it's a huge disadvantage, actually, to be a land animal that's showing your predators exactly where you are. But it's our superpower for us to be able to collaborate through this idea of entrainment, through this idea of making ourselves more coherent and be able to accomplish things together. I think it's just a hugely important evolutionary part of humanity. So I think it's very much tied to our embodiment.
Holly, I want to ask you one last question. This is a question I ask all of our guests this season. What would it take to convince you that AI is self-aware or sentient?
I think the big sticking point for me is that it is disembodied. I think if there was a embodied intelligence that was responding in concert with the physical realities of its body, then I think that would convince me.
Holly Herndon, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This has been The Most Interesting Thing in AI. I'm Nicholas Thompson. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please rate and review this on the podcast platform of your choice. Also, make sure to hit the follow button so you can be alerted about future episodes. Next week, I'll be joined by Diogo Rao, the Chief Information and Digital Officer at Eli Lilly, as well as PwC's Chief AI Officer, Dan Priest. We're going to talk about how AI is helping drug discovery. Thanks for listening.